thanks for putting together this occasion for interchange of views, preservation of memories, and opening up of possible new perspectives for the future. I've prepared a formal paper for presentation today, but my sense is that at this stage of proceedings, reading a formal paper isn't perhaps the most productive use of time. I'd rather perhaps speak about how I come to be speaking to you this afternoon. Because I was never a member of the YCW. I'm not a Catholic. How is it that I find myself at this audience, before this audience, at this point in history? Well, let me go back to the early 1980s. Shirley Williams, a Catholic, who was Secretary of State for Education in Harold Wilson's Labour government in Britain, mentioned to me in the very early 1980s this extraordinary place in Spain, a town called Mondragon, where some 37,000 people employed in a whole variety of manufacturing, retail, financial, service and support cooperatives had taken control of their lives and were joint owners of their jobs, owners of the workplaces in which they were employed. An equal say in the governance of those workplaces, equal proportionate sharing in the surpluses generated by those businesses, and living lives fully reflective of the values which I have always taken to inform the YCW. And I was immensely taken by what she had to say to me at that time, and fortuitously I had to go off shortly afterwards to a conference in Milan of Ministers for Police and Emergency Services, my employment at that time. And I thought, since the controversy over parliamentary entitlements had not at that point arisen, that I would take a detour and go to Mondragon in the Basque region of Spain and see for myself what was going on there. And so I picked up a second secretary from the Australian Embassy in Madrid to be my interpreter, and off the pair of us went for a week in Mondragon. And everything that Shirley had said to me at the place at the time turned out to be accurate. And I started thinking, after I got back to Australia, where had these ideas come from? What had been their origin? What had occurred? And the answer turned out to be the papal encyclical Rerum Novarum, that this extraordinary enterprise which a young Catholic priest had started at Mondragon had its roots in the work of Leo XIII back in 1891. And then I started to ask myself, what were the mechanisms that linked up the preparation and promulgation of that encyclical in 1891 and the establishment in 1956 of the first of the Mondragon cooperatives. So I went back and I started to ask questions, and I started to read widely, and the first thing that came up was the role of Cardinal Manning in the preparation and the inspiration of Rerum Novarum. How this extraordinary English churchman who had started life as an Anglican clergyman had become Archbishop of Westminster and ultimately one of the most influential cardinals in the world, had driven the process which led to the preparation of Rerum Novarum, and had then been commissioned by the Pope of the day to prepare the translation of it into English, and also a commentary on it which related the detail of the encyclical to the realities of England in the middle of the Industrial Revolution at the time. And I looked a bit further, and reading up on Manning took me to the work of his protege, Hilaire Belloc, and that took me to the work of G.K. Chesterton and the political philosophy which they devised under the name of distributism. And from growing out of that political philosophy, which went nowhere in England, the country of its origin, to Canada in the late 1920s and early 1930s, where in Nova Scotia, two more extraordinary Catholic priests, Moses Cody and Jimmy Tompkins, established what was called the Antigonish movement. Now, Nova Scotia in the 1920s, 1930s was a community impoverished, debilitated, undermined in ways which I think it's very difficult for those of us in this day and age to imagine. But Cody and Tompkins set out taking Rerum Novarum as the basis for their argument, to encourage the smallholder farmers, woodlot proprietors and fishermen of Nova Scotia, to set out to make themselves in Cody's great phrase, masters of their own destinies. And they did it following the inspiration of the British distributists on the basis of the establishment of cooperative endeavour through credit unions, through the formation of fishing cooperatives for the processing and marketing of their catch, retail cooperatives to provide through which purchasing would be arranged on advantageous terms. And this became an object of interest to people right around the world. People flocked literally to Antigonish in Nova Scotia to see what was going on there in terms of the product of an applied social Catholicism. And it became a source of inspiration here in Australia. The Catholic Truth Society published pamphlets on it. Various Catholic clergy, members of the YCW and Catholic clergy associated with the YCW, went off to Antigonish to see for themselves, and were so impressed by what they saw there as to try and replicate that thinking here in Australia. So I set myself two projects. First was to document the evolutionary path the thinking behind all this on an international canvas, to pick up with with Manning and the origins of Rerum Novarum, and follow them through to the establishment by the Basque priest Don Jose Maria Arizmendi Arrieta of the first of the Mondragon cooperatives in 1956, and the subsequent spectacular success of that idea, to which I'll shortly come. But I knew there was also an Australian story here, but it was not it was at that time an Australian story to which I had only the barest inklings. I knew that those ideas had been picked up in Australia. I had vaguely heard of I was vaguely aware of the Campion Society. I was barely even vaguely aware at that time of the YCW and how these things might relate to one another, and how in turn they might relate to the Santa Maria movement, of which I had been aware in the context of Labour Party politics, but not much more widely. How was it that in 1944, the writer Maisie Ward, in her biography of Chesterton, could write that the Australian bishops had adopted as the social philosophy of the Australian Church distributism, and that 40 years later, that idea, which had once seemed to be practical politics, should have vanished completely from the agenda of political discourse in this country. And I was fortunate, I suppose, in having the opportunity to read the work that Bruce Duncan had been doing, and to pick up a general perception of it. Well, the first leg of the exercise have led to the publication of this book, Jobs of Our Own, Building a Stakeholder Society. And I hope I'm about to be able to proceed to the second stage with the Australian story in this Doctorate of Theology thesis, which I have just completed under the title Manning's Children, Responses to Rerum Novarum in Victoria, 1891 to 1966. And as part of this, I came across David Keogh's work on the YCW. And I want to pay a very warm tribute to the trailblazing work David did in that respect. It's literally the book, the manuscript itself, and the interviews which went into its preparation will be a priceless resource for future researchers in getting this story in all its richness fully told and fully understood. I was fortunate too in knowing and having as a friend Helen Prates, who was well versed in the YCW and who was able to go out and conduct the interviews on which she has reported earlier today, and catch the recollections of some of these people who were involved or whose parents had been involved, because there are two generations involved here, of what they had experienced at first hand or which they had heard at second hand about the YCW and its evolution and its thought and the role of Cardijn in the shaping and bringing to maturity of it. All these threads have been important for me. Now, why is this true? Let me then return to this great enterprise in the Basque region of Spain, the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. in the late 1930s, a young seminarian, Don Jose Maria Arizmendiarrieta, fought with on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, the losing side, for his involvement on the side of the Republicans in the Basque region, where the war was fought with a particular ferocity. He was clapped into one of Franco's concentration camps after the collapse of the Republican regime in Spain and the takeover by Franco and his nationalists. And in fact, there's a museum to his memory in Mondragon, and one of the exhibits there is a list in the handwriting of one of the nationalist executioners of 17 people who would be shot on a particular day. And 16 names are crossed off. They were the ones who got shot. Arizmendiarrieta was the survivor for it, I think for reasons which we don't fully understand. And his aspiration after his release from imprisonment was to go to Louvain and study sociology there. His bishop, who I think was not entirely sympathetic to the role that he had played in the Civil War, said, "No, Louvain, go off to this town of Mondragon, an old steel-working town in the Basque region, and become a junior priest there." The senior priest in Mondragon, in fact, had been one of 17 Basque clergymen who had been shot